Alrighty, folks. Today we're going to take a look at merge conflicts in Git, how they happen, and how to fix them. So, what is a merge conflict? Well, Git does a number of things where it will try to automatically figure out how to merge changes together. So if I'm working on this file merge test, someone else is also working on that file, which is not uncommon in larger companies, larger teams, or smaller code bases, then Git will be able to, in a lot of cases, figure out how those pieces of code merge into each other. But in some cases, it cannot. And a lot of that is if you've edited the same piece of code or the same lines, Git sometimes can't figure it out. So then it just gives up and says, hey, you need to figure this out. And that's when you get a merge conflict. So, how do merge conflicts start? Well, first of all, let's say we have this file here. Very simple file. We have a function, we have operation, another function, and we're calling that function. So what I'm going to do, you can actually create a merge conflict against yourself. It's not super hard. I've pushed this code. This is in my main branch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new branch, and I'm going to call it feature1. And okay, so now if we're on feature1, let's say I want to do some changes. I want to add another operation. I want to say subtract number AB, return A minus B, okay, and then I put some stuff in here, and I say, okay, now we're gonna call this result2, and we're gonna pass in subtract number, okay, and then I go and I commit that, and I say add in subtract number, commit. I publish that branch, which pushes it up. Then okay, so now I've got what I've got is my main branch, which has this starter code. And then I've got another branch that's kind of above it that's got a new commit, but they're separate right now. So feature one has code that main does not. So now I'm going to go back to main. So now I'm on main, okay? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to console log result. Kind of a simple change, right? I'm going to say, okay, console log result, and I'm going to commit that, and I'm going to say console log the result. Okay, so now main now has a change that feature one does not, and feature one has a change that main does not. The conditions are ripe. If I come back here, back to my feature one branch, what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge main into this branch. And this is not uncommon when you work on a feature. A lot of times you're going to be pulling your main branch into that feature just to get updated changes. Maybe someone said, hey, I did some work on this file. Can you pull that in and make sure that you have it? So I'm going to go to bootcamp, class activity. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say git pull origin main. And what that's going to do is that's going to pull changes from main into my branch. And you notice Git immediately says, hey, auto merging this, and that's what Git will say when it's got changes against it. Conflict, merge conflict, automatic merge failed, fix conflicts, and then commit the result. Now, if I go here, you can see where those conflicts are. And the reason there's a conflict is because I added a line here. Now, you notice I added this line on line 10 on the original main. Git is smart enough to realize that line 10 here, it's not going to conflict against that. It realizes this line is meant to go below line 13 here. But I've added some code there, and they've also added some code there. So what do I do here? This, you could use this, the merge editor. The merge editor in VS Code is not amazing, but let's take a look at that. This is what's called a three-way merge. And so what that is you look here and you can see the incoming code on the left, the outgoing or your current code on the right, and then down here is the original result. If you want to work with this, that's fine. What you can do is like if I say accept incoming, you notice it pulls down this line. If I say accept current, it pulls down my line. If I say accept both, it'll actually put them both, and then you can remove them. But I'm actually not super fond of that. Where did my changes go? Uh, something got screwed up here. Mm, okay. Um, you could use the other one too. I'm just going to use this here and I'm going to say accept both because I want both of these to be in here. Complete merge. And you notice when I look in here now, it shows that this was a new change that was added in. And then it's already got this merge commit here, and then you just click commit. Now that merge test, that merge issue is done. Where did it go now? There it is. Now I've got, not that. Now I've got both changes in here. I've got my changes, and then I've got these changes as well. Now you notice there was never a problem with subtract number because no one ever edited that. Let's do another one. So if I go in here into main, which doesn't have any of those changes, mind, and I make this be, I'm just going to log A at this point, and then I'm going to do another console log. Result plus 10, because why not? And now I'm going to push this in. I'll say okay. Some more changes. Sync changes. And now that I'm on main, I'm actually going to merge in my feature 1 branch. So I'm pulling feature 1 back into main. Well, again, I get a merge conflict. Let's take a look at it. So if you can see this change here and this change here, this comes from that branch, my feature 1 branch, but there was no conflict with it because Git is smart enough to see like I didn't change that code and feature 1 didn't change this code. So this change here had no problem. This change here had no problem. The problem is where we both edited the same lines. So now it's got, again, this console log and here. So this is the non-merge, three-way merge. You have the same buttons, accept current change, which will accept this top one, accept incoming change, which will accept this one, or accept both. And also the other thing that you can do here is if you need to, you can edit this. So let's say I say, okay, I don't really want this change in here because I already have this result, but I want some of it. So I'm actually going to go and I'm going to make this be plus 10. Or no, maybe I want it to be plus, whoops, plus 20. Let's do that. So I can say, okay, accept both changes, and then I go in here and I modify that. I can do that. That's perfectly fine. And then once you're done merging changes, you just click this plus button. And you can see now if I stage it, it's got these changes, it's got this change, and then the other change I just made as part of the merge. So a lot of times, if you're dealing with really complicated stuff, like this was an easy example. It's kind of easy to see what was going on and what changed. There are often more complicated examples, like maybe you've moved 100 lines of some function and then someone else has changed it. My recommendation in those cases is if you're not completely sure what to do, back up your code. So take your code that you have, make a copy of it somewhere else just so you have it, accept the incoming change, and then reapply your changes on top of it. That doesn't mean taking your code and copy pasting it. What that means is looking at what the situation was because you kind of remember what it looked like before you made your changes. So take a look at that and kind of see what changes did this person make and how do your changes fit into it. That's kind of complicated, but it's usually the best way to go about it. The other way you can go around is just by blowing away their changes, but that's not as great because oftentimes, especially in larger projects, there's multiple pieces of code that are going to be relying on the same change set, and you're only removing part of them, so it can cause a lot of issues. And you don't know necessarily what they did. So yeah, my recommendation, if you're confused in most cases, is to just accept their changes and then redo your changes on top, which can be a little time consuming. And the way you get around this is by making a bunch of different files. So like you can see, there's a bunch of conflicts here. What I could do is I actually could split this code up and put it in other places. Like maybe I can make a function around just this particular piece, and then this particular piece does something else. Inevitably, you're going to run into conflicts as part of your work. That's just kind of how it is with bigger companies and teams working with each other. But the best way I think to resolve them is to just look at what's done and take in what was there, because what's there and what you pulled in is probably working already and your stuff is not finished yet, and that's why you got a merge conflict. And then redo your work on top of it. Communicate with your teammates and find out what they're working on. And you can kind of help avoid merge conflicts that way as well. So you could actually ask your teammates, hey, are you working on the particular operations file? And they say, yeah. You say, okay, well, Ken, let me know when you're done and I'll come in after you. Right. Another thing that you could do, so if I just commit this up, I could actually, we do what's called skeletoning. So let's say I know that we want to add two more operations, and I know that two people on my team are going to be working on that, but I don't want them to have conflicts. If both of them add a function in here, so if I add a function in main and I say like multiply, whoops, number a, b, and then I do my return a times b, and then someone else is working on divide number and they're putting it in the exact same spot, well, that's going to be a conflict. So what you can do instead is, I'm on main right now, I'm just going to make multiply number, and then I'm going to make divide number, okay? And then I'm going to push those up. See, there's nothing in these methods yet. And I'm going to say, okay, add skeleton methods. Sync that. Now, if I go and make a new branch off of this, and I say, okay, create new branch, make divide, okay? And so now if I make divide, I just fill this and I say return A divided by B, right? Okay, now let's say I go back to main and I'm working on, I'm saying, whoops, that wasn't right. Okay, so make divide, and then I commit this. I say add division code. Okay, that's there. And now, let's say I'm as someone else, or even as myself, I'm going to go make a new branch, and I'm going to call it make multiply. And then on make multiply, I'm going to fill out multiply number, and I'm going to return A times B. Okay, so now I say add multiply function, commit. Now if I go to main, and I say, okay, cool, on main I want to pull these in. I want to get pull origin make multiply. Okay, so that's merged in, no conflicts. And then I say make divide. And again, you can see there were no conflicts. The reason there were no conflicts is because Git is smart enough to know that these two lines of code have nothing to do with each other because these functions already existed. So this can be a way to help avoid conflicts, is you build out all the function names in one commit, and then you branch off of them. So if I hadn't done it that way, so let me actually get rid of that, and then I'll, come on, there we go. Remove methods. So now let's say I want to do the same thing, but I've done it without those skeletons. Okay, so I'm going to make a new branch, and I'm going to call it multiply 2. So in here I say, okay, function do multiply AB, return, whoops, return A times B. Okay, that's in there, that's good. Push that up, add do multiply. Okay, so now the multiply branch is done. I'm going to go back to main, so you notice it's not there anymore. I'm going to create a new branch, divide 2. And now here I'm going to say, okay, function do divide, AB, return A divided by B. Same drill. I'm going to go ahead and commit this, create do divide, publish it. So now I have two branches. One of them has the do multiply and one of them has the do divide, just like we had before, but there weren't any skeletons for them. So if I go back to main now, which doesn't have either, and the first thing I do is I say get pull origin multiply 2. Okay, now I have the do multiply in here. This is all good. Now if I say divide 2, Now we get a conflict. Now, why do we get a conflict? Because the same lines were changed, and Git isn't smart enough. Whoops. Git isn't smart enough to know that these functions can both work together. So you can see it actually looks at this line. It says, oh, that end bracket of both functions, well, both of them have the same thing, but here's where there's a problem. So now if I accept both changes, I can do that, but now I've got to do a little extra work. So you can see if you skeleton out the functions first, and then only one person is working on each function, then Git doesn't have merge conflicts because it knows enough to keep those lines separate from each other. It knows that they're not related. But if you're adding in functions at the same place without that skeletoning, that's when you get merge conflicts. So now I've handled that, but you can see if there was a really complicated thing, how that might work. Some way you can do that if you're dealing with HTML. HTML. Is let's say you've got someone who wants to work on a div, someone who wants to work on another div, you can actually put in some comment blocks. So I could say here, do header here, and then here, do body here. And then if this is committed and this is put into your main, anyone that does any code that's put here is not going to conflict with code that's put here because Git is smart enough to see that they're not the same. So that's one way that you can avoid conflicts in HTML files. Whereas if you don't have this, you could also, like, it could screw up because Git doesn't realize, like, if you put stuff on line 10, it's going to say, oh, well, you put the same stuff on line 10. Git does not actually know what any of this stuff means. Git does not know this is a comment. Git does not know what a function means. What it does know is it knows that this code didn't change. So if I put in a bunch of random stuff here, wow, I didn't know those were tags. It knows because it sees this, it knows that this is separated from anything that's done down here. So it's smart enough to figure out where gaps in documents are, which means if you put in something that lets it know this is a boundary and you don't change that, then it's smart enough to figure out that there's no conflict. So that's why this sort of stuff can help. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. If you do run into conflicts, which you will, then this can make it a little bit easier to figure out how to work through them. And also, there's a couple ways that you can avoid dealing with them in the first place. Anyway, I'll see you in class.